Welcome to the Coaching Uncovered podcast. My name is Brent Davis and I'm the host of the podcast, and this is my podcast where I get to talk to coaches about coaching. And today I have got an Australian PGA professional on again in Christian Hamilton. Thanks for coming in and talking to me today, Christian.
Thanks, Brent. Great to be on your program.
It's going to be a cool chat, I think, today. I think we've got some pretty cool things to go through. But for people who don't have or who haven't come across you before, tell them a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. So as you said, I've been a PGA member for getting closer to the 20-year mark now. Brent, a few grey hairs that are starting to poke through that remind me on a daily basis. But
I was 20 years this year as well, so it's scary.
Oh, yeah. So, but yeah, look, I've been really fortunate in my career. I've worked across a variety of different sort of levels of golf. Started very much in the public sort of golf course domain and did my traineeship under two fantastic fellows of Steve Montgomery and Warren Young at Centenary Park in Frankston in Melbourne. And started with them when I was like 13, actually, just working probably illegally at the time, 7 days a week. I probably wasn't old enough to actually work under law sort of back then. But anyway, it sort of fast forward a bit, did my traineeship with those guys, finished when I was 21, went out and played and quickly found out that playing wasn't for me. I probably didn't like the tins of baked beans and spaghettis and being on the budget and budget accommodation. It's not too glamorous, as I think all professionals know, starting off. And I sort of made, I suppose, the decision when I finished playing that I wanted to get into a place where I could really see my sort of professional sort of coaching and management career start to, really take take some speed or take a really good direction going forward. And started working with Stuart Leong at Sandhurst, and I suppose I was bugging him for quite some time to sort of try and get coaching with him and have a bit of an in at Sandhurst, and worked in the shop there and started to have those opportunities of doing more with the club on the club side of things and management. So, and then I suppose I fell into a bit of a hybrid model of, sort of full-time coach and full-time director of golf at Sandhurst, which sort of was a great time of my life. I was there for 10 years. And then sort of, I suppose in some of the real focus areas of my coaching, sort of led me into a position with Golf Australia and the PGA of Australia. It was, it's no secret to the people that know me that I'm really passionate around disability inclusion, and the work that I'd done at Sandhurst with the PGA. It was a bit of a logical step for me to try and move into golf administration and try and fill what I think was a bit of a void in our sport of supporting people into the game of golf with the people that have disabilities. So we've enjoyed a great relationship with the PGA and with GA in developing that inclusion strategy. And sort of fast forward now, I've been here for about 4 years. So that's sort of to take you up to current day.
Yeah, no, that's cool, and it's a space that we can have some pretty serious conversations about, and it gets into some pretty detailed stuff about coaching. But as we head down that path, I'm curious about what kind of sparked that first contact. So, who was the first type of golfer that came to you with that in that all ability space at Sandhurst? I'm assuming turned up on the coaching tee one day and kind of sparked that interest for you.
Yeah, I started very early days. I think it was one of the first sort of, it was very early on in my days at Sandhurst. Started working with an organisation, Limbs for Life. They're a national peer support organisation for people that experience limb loss around the country. It was pretty evident very quickly. We ran some come and try sort of sessions for people who had experienced limb loss and were going through rehabilitation, and just sort of seeing firsthand the peer support that goes on at those sessions. So golf was almost the vehicle to bring people together, but then the real magic happened after the sessions where we actually shared a coffee afterwards in the clubhouse or something. And, it was actually seeing, and I was witnessing people's lives change through meeting other people that have obviously experienced limb loss or, same sort of experiences in life. And those people were sort of collaborating and helping others to sort of give those people, the tools that they need to make their lives better. And, one particular guy turned up in a wheelchair that didn't have prosthetics. Alan, his name was, from Ballarat. He drove down just to see what this was all about. And pretty quickly understanding his story, he just had problems fitting into prosthetics just due to his amputation. And, Melissa, who's she's the CEO of Limbs for Life, and through a couple of other peer support guys that were there, just sort of gave him the contacts that he needed to go and get legs that actually fitted. And lo and behold, probably about 6 months later, we saw Alan, but instead of coming down in a wheelchair, he's, walking through the front door. And,
Wow.
to be that sort of person that facilitates that engagement, it wasn't about the golf for me. It was more about the sort of human element and what we're doing in significantly changing people's lives.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, and it's a powerful thing to be able to get that person out of a chair essentially and give them access to be able to get out and about is powerful. And I'll tell a story too. I think it was the first coach training that you ran face to face. We had a golfer you were using with the paragolfer, and you put them in the paragolf, and it was the first time that person had been out of that chair for something crazy like 5 or 10 years that they hadn't been out of that chair. And they played golf in the past, and to put them in the paragolfer and see them hit shots again, and just the excitement in that golfer's face was just a powerful thing. And I think it's a pretty special place to be involved with in coaching.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there. And I think the definition of coaching, we tend to, as coaches, we think about, when someone comes through our front door, no matter their level of ability, we're thinking about how to improve their ball flight or fix a certain problem they have with their chipping or putting or, skill-based stuff. But, when you're dealing and I shouldn't say dealing, but when you're working with people with disability, it's quite often, just solving issues like, as you explained then, around mobility issues and providing equipment like the paragolfer, or whether it's, specific attachments that connect with prosthetics, or whether it's, finding someone that can act as a carer for someone with, significant intellectual disability to go around on the golf course. And, I suppose everything that I do is through a lens of creating a situation where people can participate in our game on their own terms and not and be self-sufficient. And I think that's the sort of lens that I look through with my own coaching as number one. It's not necessarily about whether they're swinging it on plane or those sort of things. And, a great example, like with the paragolfer, a lot of people that have spinal cord injuries may not be able to sort of bend down and put the tee in the ground. They rely on a carer, but, we found a great little device from the UK that is simple. It looks like a litter picker that someone can just tee the ball up themselves. And, I've got a couple of guys that I've worked with in the past that they just said, look, I can actually go out and play on my own terms now. I actually don't need someone. I can just knock off work and go out and play. And I don't need anyone to tee my ball up anymore. So, that's, for me, that's also coaching.
Yeah, for sure. It's cool. So talk people, and I'm hearing the paragolfer coming up in a few different podcasts the last few weeks that I've just that I've subscribed to. So talk people through the paragolfer and how it works and how that piece of equipment helps golfers get out on the golf course easily.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I work with this thing all the time. So, but for people out there that aren't sure of what it is, it's essentially a bit of a hybrid between a wheelchair and a golf cart. You could potentially say, there's a lot of power chairs out there that people use that can stand the participant up. So, And the Paragolf is a good example of that sort of type of technology where the user can drive around the golf course. They can pretty much get anywhere they need to get on the golf course. It'll go in shallow bunkers, and generally, as a rule, if you get a bunker groomer into a bunker to groom that, one of the ones that the superintendent sits on and drives through the bunker, the paragolfer will go in there as well. And so it creates that ability for the person to get out on course and move around the course. But the other really cool thing is that it will actually stand a player up to hit a shot. So as I said, just gives that player 100% sort of independence to get out there and participate on their own terms. Yeah.
Sounds awesome. So if you've got someone that's been in a chair for a certain period of time and all of a sudden you're putting them in this paragolfer to stand them up, are there any problems that might come across as a coach?
Yeah, we always take people through, I suppose, a pretty in-depth sort of interview process, you could say. Ideally, when you're working with someone with whether it's a spinal cord injury or those sort of, I suppose, injuries that people would then necessarily need a chair to move around. There are some extra issues that you need to consider. Things like bone density. If the person's not used to standing up and putting a lot of weight through their skeletal sort of frame, that can be an issue. Blood pressure as well. When we think about the vascular system and how all that works, you stand someone up that hasn't been upright for a very long time. A lot of blood starts to rush south, and I suppose people can start to feel a little bit dizzy, and so blood pressure and things like that, you do have to be aware. But we always sort of say, especially, we're very fortunate that we have a workforce out there in Australia, these PGA All Abilities coaches. We've got over 160 trained professionals now that have had some training in the paragolfer, but ideally through that first experience would recommend that maybe an occupational therapist would sort of attend as well, just to or if that's not the case, the PGA member is always asking a lot of qualifying sort of questions to the participant, just understanding whether how they feel, which is funny because if you ask someone that hasn't stood up and hit a golf shot for 10 years how they feel, they're probably going to say to you they feel bloody amazing, But you do have to actually ask and say, yeah, no, I know you feel amazing, you're hitting some shots, but I'm, noticing a bit of a colour change in your face or something like that, But look, generally, people let you know if they're not feeling that great. So
yeah, for sure. So do you find that a golfer who has experienced a paragolfer and hits shots again for the first time for a long time tend to go out and buy this piece of equipment pretty quickly and start getting into golf, or is it something that they hire, or how does it work?
yeah, I suppose it all depends on the player's sort of own set of circumstances. I know we've had a lot of success in Victoria and to some extent other states around Australia in working with organisations like the TAC here in Victoria, the Traffic Accident Commission. They see a lot of value in getting people that have experienced road trauma, as an example, back out in the community, back out physically active, socially connected. Because essentially for every dollar they spend in sport and recreation, physical activity, they're going to set. It's a known fact they're going to save a couple of dollars in the health system. So it's a good investment, and we've got proven examples of that in action through some people that have actually got these paragolfers that rusted on members of golf clubs like anyone else. The other really, I suppose, game changer in Australia is the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the NDIS. So you're seeing a situation now where a lot of, I suppose, participants of the NDIS, people with disability, are sort of building these sort of things into their own support plans. Sort of working through with the NDIS saying, look, I want to get back to physical activity and want to get back to club golf. I want to, just be part of the community again. And certainly these things like the paragolfer are things that create that capacity.
So government funding, always a challenging space, I'm sure. I'm sure there's been some little speed bumps down that path with regards to government funding.
Yeah, there can be, but interesting enough, though, like I sort of go back to my other point that the investment of, the investment of government that they play in physical activity and the savings that come out through the other side through the health system, it is a good investment. And yes, they are expensive. You might be looking at $30,000 to $35,000, but if you depreciate that over 10 years, it's not a big it's not a big investment. And I'll put it into a context that you know if you're receiving acute care in a hospital over a couple of days or 2 or 3 day period, you think about the cost of that bed for 2 or 3 days, and then you think about the cost of a paragolfer for a year. If you break that out, let's keep the arithmetic simple, but over 10 months, you look at $3,500. It's a good investment for government. So I suppose the biggest challenge for us has been to go through the different layers of government and get to the right people that can understand that this is actually a good investment for the participant.
Yeah, for sure. So how many paragolfers are there in Australia at the moment?
I would say there's definitely over 20 now around the country. A lot of those are privately owned, as I said, through through insurance and things like that. But it's growing at an enormous rate, and I've got to put my hand up and really call out, James Gribble of Empower Golf. I think he's one individual that saw a real need to really try and push inclusivity and I think through his own circumstances, and I think everyone really connected with James when we first met him, that he's a guy who's an absolute golf nut like anyone else, and why should we why shouldn't someone like James experience exactly what we experience as golfers? And he's been a massive advocate for the paragolfer and for people with spinal cord injuries across the country to get into the game.
Well, it just makes common sense, I think. Getting someone outside in the fresh air can't be a bad thing for anybody. If they're getting their headspace right, being out on the golf course, it can't be a bad thing for them as a person in general. So I think, as you said, convincing the right people of the benefits of this is an important step.
Yeah.
So heading down that path, obviously, and I've seen the paragolfer, so the player inside the paragolfer is standing very, very vertical. There's not too much hip flex when they're in the paragolfer. So that's going to have, obviously, an influence on the type of equipment that they can and can't use. So how do you cater for that in a coaching sense?
Yeah. And once again, it comes down to understanding a bit more about the individual. So, spinal cord injuries aren't all the same. We know that they've got incomplete and, various different sort of levels of impairment as well. And, just the term paraplegic and quadriplegic, people think quadriplegic and they think, someone doesn't have the use of their arms, but we can have what we call incomplete quadriplegic, that we can still, have use of our arms and still make grip, but we might need assistance in, gripping solutions and things like that to hold onto the club. But definitely where the particular injury is in the spine can determine where, for instance, we use the chest strap as an example. So just to sort of paint the picture for those listening in, there's a strap that goes across the chest to actually keep obviously keep the participant upright. Now, depending where that break is in the spine, if it's quite high, they will have very, very little use of their core. So they actually need the chest strap quite high on the chest, which if that's the case, you've virtually got no, shoulder rotation because the player is actually strapped into the chair. So you'll see a lot of those players, to create the amount of range to swing the golf club, they'll actually swing the club a lot of the time. They'll swing the club one-handed as a result, just so they can actually get more range and more speed out of the golf club. Where, if it's someone that, is a paraplegic and potentially the injury is quite low, maybe in the lower lumbar spine, you'll have a situation where that chest strap can be worn quite low because they do have control of their core, and as a result, that player will then be able to sort of rotate through the shoulders because that chest strap is quite low. So given the, I suppose, circumstances of the individual, it really will determine sort of how much range of movement the golfer has.
No, that makes sense. So, but if you're going to build a golf club for a person that's in a para golfer, was there any sort of club fitting changes that you would make? Obviously, if they're swinging with a single hand, you'd probably have to go ultra light. I'm
Absolutely.
assuming.
Yep.
Is there any other changes that you would have to make?
Yeah, and once again, with the para golfer, I'm getting, the players generally in a pretty sort of straight sort of standing position. There's no hip flex, as you said. There's no forward tilt in the spine generally. So as a result, length is obviously a real issue. But then, putting the old club fitting cap on of, when I was back at Sandhurst and coming up with my own solutions, effective lie angle, as we know, as we're adding length, that lie angle is getting more upright and upright as I go. So, so looking at turf interaction with heads is really important. Getting those lie angles right, getting the length right, so the player can reach the golf ball. As you said, with those players that are swinging it one-handed, the weight is really, really important. So they're all factors. Yeah. So it really takes someone to think outside the square a lot of the time.
It's certainly appealing to my coaching brain, coming up with solutions for players, which is pretty cool. So obviously you haven't experienced it in anywhere the detail that you have personally, but being able to tweak your ideal golf swing to suit different people in front of you and is good fun as a golf coach. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the most challenging one that I had what we call a quadrilateral amputee. So this lady had no arms and she had no legs. She had prosthetic legs that she got around on, but no arms. So it's just like, as a coach, you think, well, how are they going to grip the golf club? So what we essentially did was make, it was probably 60 inches, nearly 70 inches long. This 5-wood had plenty of loft on it. But we basically got a 2-thumb grip, if you can imagine, at the very, very end. And instead of putting it on so the flat paddle was on the front or on the top, we actually put it on the side. And what she was able to do is actually tuck it under her armpit and then cross her sort of, I suppose, her forearms across. She didn't have any hands, but crossing her forearms across the shaft, and because of the shaft length, she was able to still pivot her torso with the club actually wedged underneath her armpit and actually generate some club head movement and club head speed through that. But cool. That was a bit of a knock up job of an hour or so in the basement at Sandhurst in the repair room, just knocking that one up. But it's great, and as you said, it does make you. It definitely does make you think outside the square.
Oh, that's cool. There was a similar player, I think, at that first training session as well that we ran with. I don't think he had any arms. I think he was had short stumps maybe, and he had an extra long club that he shoved up under an armpit and still managed to, and bent over a fair bit and still managed to make pretty decent contact as well. So that was pretty cool to see.
Absolutely, and I think as a coach too, our most important assets are our ears, I think. And, quite often I'd be I give the player a piece of equipment and say, well, how would you do it if I gave you this? Or if I said, the objective here is to move this ball that way, and here's something to actually move the ball with, how would you do it? So, rather than go in with a closed mindset of how we think they're going to be able to do it, or we might think that they can't do it, is just asking the question and getting feedback from the player from the start.
And again, that is so simple but makes so much sense. You've probably got a person in front of you that's had 20, 30, 40 years of experience of getting stuff to work for them.
100%. You're
So
exactly
you
right.
just
They live on a daily basis with their disability. They know how to do things. It's not up to us to actually prescribe a lot of the time the solution. It's about listening and making what they do better.
No, that's cool. That probably leads us into the second part I want to talk about. So we've covered the para golfer pretty well. So we've how about amputees? Talk me through some experience you've had with amputee golfers, whether it's legs or arms, and what are some of the things that you've had to cope with in that space in coaching?
Yeah, I'll probably start by saying, it's one of the best sports for amputees because, if we think about through the rehabilitation process as well, dynamic balance, we're moving, and, stability, you're activating their core. This I'm talking about lower leg or lower limb amputees. It's something that kids can do, seniors can do. It brings people together. So there's just so much, great things about the sport of golf for the amputee community. I think that's why we have such a great relationship with Limbs for Life. But yeah, I think the important thing is first as a coach to really gauge an understanding of what people want out of the game, because obviously we've got this opportunity where we can present these sort of dual pathways to amputees, especially through the event space. Disabled golf. We've got the world rankings for golfers with disability now, and we have some great events around the world now. I think we've got the Australian All Abilities Championship integrated within the Australian Open, and European Tour doing some really great things, and majority of those players are amputees. And but as we know, there's so many amputee golfers that are out there just participating in clubland, or they're social golfers, or they're, so I think one of the first things I like to do is get an understanding of what sort of direction they want to go in. And yeah, secondly, I suppose there's no sort of fast analogy about, a leg amputee and what we sort of see and how they move, or an arm amputee and what they do. It's very individual. I sort of like to think that people sit on this sort of continuum of ability somewhere. And, I take a guy like Shane Luke. He's a leg amputee that plays out at Bankstown in Sydney, plays off a +1 handicap, and takes his leg off to play. So if you look at just everyone, even myself or yourself, Brent, as a golfer, we sit on this continuum of ability. Now, Shane's up here with, as an elite amateur or as a professional golfer, where you might get a leg amputee that's a fair way further down the sort of that sort of continuum, if you know what I mean. So, but yeah, I think also having a basic understanding of prosthetics and how they work, and as a coach, it's okay to ask questions. We're not expected to know everything about how a microprocessor in a bionic knee works, or what sort of range or movement goes through an ankle joint of a X5 Genium leg. I know all these terms because I know a fair bit about prosthetics. But one other thing I think that is really important, and this is consistent across anyone that uses prosthetics, is whether they get any discomfort or pain when they're swinging the golf club, because as you know, as a coach, the body will always try and protect itself. So some of the movements that we generally see, the reasons behind those movements can be pain related. So this is the beauty of being a coach, and being a good coach. You've just got to dig for this information a lot of the time. But I know I've jumped around a lot with that answer, but
No, that's good.
from a technical perspective, yeah, sure, you do see some similarities. Leg amputees, from my own experience, sometimes I don't see, a really good quality hip sort of rotation. We might see a lot of sliding, and as a result, we might see some changes in, spine angle and things like that. But yeah, it's just too hard to generalize a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And again, it probably just enforces the fact that as a coach, you should be asking questions. You should be digging as deep as you can and not assuming certain things. I was just curious that if someone had two prosthetic legs, if there was any generalized pattern in, say, shifting of pressure in that type of golfer. Is there anything that
Yeah.
comes up as a standard thing? But it sounds like you just need to treat that person in front of you as a individual person and coach them.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I take someone like Mike Rolls, who's a bilateral amputee, double leg amputee. Um, he's a real athlete and he can move really, really well. And then you might get someone that has a similar amputation that, to actually load up over say the trailing leg and rotate, there might be some rotational force going through that stump that is giving that player a bit of discomfort. So, they'll try and stack over the ball as a player, you're looking at that player going, geez, I'd love to get that player a little bit more behind the ball and shallow that golf swing out a little bit. But as I said, if you understand why they're doing that, and quite often it's just about digging, getting those answers, and then you can understand why. But then, once you get those answers, you still need to improve their ball flight. So it's okay, well, how do I shallow this player out a little bit if they're stacked on top of the ball and they don't like to move onto that trail leg? These are all things, and this is the beauty of coaching is finding solutions that are outside what we would probably classify as the norm.
Solve those puzzles. That's a cool thing to do as a golf coach. So no, pretty
Exactly.
cool stuff there. I'm curious. You brought up something earlier on just about joint tournaments and joint events. Can you talk me through that? How have you set those up?
Yeah. So about 3 years ago, we actually, a bit of a strange thing to do, but Golf Australia became a member federation of the European Disabled Golf Association. So people would be scratching their heads going, hang on, why is that the case? We saw we saw some really good things happening in Europe where there was a group of about 16 to 18 national federations that were all sharing the same tournament structure and a ranking system and everything like that. And we saw some real merit in getting on board with that. And so we became essentially the first national organisation or national NSO outside of Europe to join. And what that enabled us to do is to then create tournaments, then, as I said, that deliver ranking points for athletes, then connect into this ranking system that was shared by these other countries. And pretty quickly, the European Disabled Golf Association became EDGAR because it didn't, they had to change the name because it wasn't European anymore. But, to this day, we've got, I think, around 35 national federations that are members of EDGAR, including us, New Zealand, Costa Rica. We're really sort of expanding the footprint. India, South Africa. So it's gaining a lot of momentum, and a lot of the work that EDGAR are doing it as a bit of a legacy piece for the sport. So a lot of the work that's being done will become essentially property of the International Golf Federation, the IGF, who are you could say the global governing body of golf in the eyes of the International Paralympic Committee. So we're doing all this work to try and get the governance right, trying to get the structures right around the world so that golf is afforded that opportunity of joining the Paralympics in hopefully 2028.
That's cool. And there's been some joint tournaments in Australia, haven't there, where you've had all of Billy's golfers playing the same course on the same time or close to the same time as the able-bodied golfers. Talk me through that.
Yeah, so we have two sort of levels of tournaments. We have, or we have a few more than that, but we have some great partners around the country that we work with. So organisations like Blind Golf Australia or Special Olympics, those sort of impairment-specific organisations, which we badge their events as ranking events. So it helps sort of grow participation in their own events. Golf Australia also run state inclusive championships, so they're open to all impairment categories, and once again, they offer world ranking points. So we see a lot of engagement from people all around the country and participating in those events. And then sort of the pinnacle on the Australian calendar is the Australian All Abilities Championship. So that's we use the rankings, the world rankings for golfers with disability, to invite the top 12 ranked golfers around the world on the world rankings to participate in the Emirates Australian Open. It's happened the last couple of years, and it's a great way for us to showcase the inclusivity of our game, where we can have essentially a tournament within a tournament, and the players play at sort of different interval tee times mixed in with the Australian Open field from Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And it's just really cool that the winner of the Australian All Abilities Championship gets to walk up the 18th fairway in front of packed stands, half an hour in front of the winner of the last group of the Emirates Australian Open. So, yeah, I think we're one of the only sports that can do that around the world, and that's something that we should celebrate a lot more.
Yeah, I agree.
People can see our game as a little bit exclusive, and this is just turns that concept on its head, I think.
No, that's a powerful thing, and that just must encourage golfers to get out there and try more if they're seeing that type of exposure and that type of golfer out there. As you said, going up that final hole in front of that huge crowd, I'd be very, very scared doing it myself personally. So I can only it'd be awful for those kind of golfers.
They did an amazing job. I think the first 2 years that we've run this. We're working with players that have, the biggest event they may have played in before this is their club championship or something like that, and they've got a dozen people around the green. So, a lot of these players, they've done a fantastic job as ambassadors for the game. The other really cool thing is we get such great support through our broadcast partner with Channel 7 for that event as well. It's they see the Australian All Abilities Championship as just as important, to tell that story and tell it well. So I think they've done a really good job over the first 2 years of covering the event, and it's nice to see every sort of 20 minutes we've got nice little packages of that tournament within the broadcast. So it's definitely does makes an impact. The amount of inquiries and the lift in participation that we've seen as a result of that's been fantastic.
That's cool. So getting all ability golfers into golf, how do you go about that? Is it like a group type situation, or do they tend to approach you? Do you go through the organisations to get that started? How do you get a foot in the door in that space as a coach?
Yeah, so as I think I said earlier, like we're really fortunate that we have a professional workforce as a sport. I think that's number one. We've got a great membership of PGA members around the country, but where we saw an opportunity was to have a group of people with an industry-based accreditation around inclusive coaching, and to the sector as well, that we had a specific group of professionals that we could basically say to the sector, if you have a disability, reach out to one of these PGA All Abilities coaches, because they've had not only the extra training in supporting people with various impairments. They have the knowledge behind things like the paragolf for assistive equipment, those sort of things. So they can provide the solutions for the participants. But I think the big one is, and this is something that our coaches do really well, I think, around the country, is that they're that conduit between the facility and the community. And definitely through partnerships. There's a lot of support organisations out there in the community that support people with disability, and probably the best starting point is local government. So, I always tell coaches to reach out to your local government. Where I am here down in the Mornington Peninsula, it's Mornington Peninsula Shire, and I know that if I want to reach those disability organisations in my shire, I can just go straight to the local council and find out who those organisations are and make a few calls. And there's a lot of shared value about, what we deliver as a sport. We deliver that social connection and that social interaction and physical activity that people with disability can get involved, from all ages. And and that's something that's really valuable to these organisations as well. They want to see the people that they support have the same opportunities as everyone else in the community. So there's a lot of shared value. So I always say to coaches, reach out to your local council to start with.
For sure. So again, probably the first step for any Australian coaches out there that are in on this podcast is to get yourself accredited. So they can do that via the PGA's training programs. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the fairway, people, PGA members out there just need to jump on My PGA and jump into the education area, and they'll find the module in the game development area, and it's pretty in depth. But we wanted to make it in depth because we wanted to say to the sector that it is something which is substantial, and there's been a lot of education provided to our membership, but yeah, definitely, we're seeing that group of members grow annually. We've got over 160 now. We've got great coverage around the country, and I know both organisations, both PGA and Golf Australia, have got specific search capabilities on their websites for people with disability to find these coaches. So, it's a terrific thing.
That's cool. And just touching on that training, because it's a space where there's going to be so many different types of golfers coming to you. So you could have someone that has to have access to a paragolfer, someone who's an amputee, someone who's got some other disability. How do you keep on top of all that as a coach?
I tend not to think about like if you look at communication as an example. Good communication is just good communication. I think, we should be able to adapt our delivery to suit the needs of whoever the individual is. And, we know we adapt our styles. We're teaching juniors or we're teaching seniors or, our delivery can change. But essentially, in working on things like, improving someone's ball flight, the principles around improving that don't change. Like we look at club delivery and, those sort of things that influence ball flight. It doesn't really matter, if you know what I mean. I suppose I hope I'm not dancing around the subject, but
no, not at all.
But yeah, so specific, impairment categories. If I'm working with someone that's vision impaired versus an amputee, yes, of course, my delivery is going to change. But I'll be a lot more kinesthetic, a lot more hands-on with someone's vision impaired, like a B1 golfer that doesn't have any vision whatsoever, and I'll be taking a bit of a different approach. But basically, yeah, nothing changes from a flight perspective. I'm still trying to improve, club delivery.
Again, it's getting, and again, please jump in if I haven't quite explained this properly, but it's getting a general understanding of the principles around the different disabilities, and then asking questions of that person standing in front of you about the things they can and can't do and how they want to be coached, as opposed to just assuming.
Yeah, 100%. The worst thing that a coach can have is a closed mindset. I think if we sort of work in, if we, someone comes and presents on the lesson tee, someone that's vision impaired, for instance, someone that might be using a cane, someone that might have a guide dog, we would be excused of thinking that person has no vision. Where if I ask some qualifying questions, I might learn that, someone has, has no what we call visual acuity, like central vision, but they might have peripheral vision, or they might see outlines of certain things. So, so it's just through asking those probing questions, I'm building a bit of a profile on that player. Even just simple little things like, what other sports do they play? And if you do get an answer that you're not sure of, like if someone says, look, I play, I'm vision impaired and I play, I play soccer. It's okay as a coach to say, well, how do you play soccer? If I'd like to know. And then, the conversation might go, well, I have a tiny little bit of sight out of my left side. So then as a coach, I'm going to make sure that I'm standing in that corner of, of that peripheral sort of area where they can actually see me as a golf coach. I might preset their head a lot, when we're hitting shots, so they can sight the golf ball. So, it's just about asking qualifying questions all the time and if you do get a yes or a no answer, it's just about digging more, essentially.
Makes sense. Now, you've shifted from a pure coaching role into more, as you said earlier on, you're now working for Golf Australia in this space. So tell me about some of the plans you've got for this space in the future, or that you're currently heading down at the moment with Golf Australia.
Yeah. Well, we've spoken heavily about the, PGA All Abilities Coach accreditation, and we do have capacity around the country now. We've got very, very good capacity with coaches. The thing that we've probably been lacking over the first 3 years, and we did this deliberately, is we didn't have necessarily a product, like My Golf is a good example. Our national participation program for kids in Australia. We didn't necessarily have an all abilities offering. We wanted to make sure we grew the workforce and we had capacity around the country first before we actually did the program piece. We didn't want a situation where someone in, say, Orange in New South Wales with disability would then, look up to find the nearest program being in, on the North Shores of Sydney, for example. So we do have those program vehicles now in My Golf, All Abilities, and Get Into Golf All Abilities. So Get Into Golf was recently launched. It's our national participation program for adults. But once again, we've got an all abilities offering there for people in the community that don't necessarily feel supported in mainstream environments. So it feels like we've got the program piece there ready to go now. So, so the next 12 months will be really busy on us really focusing on engaging these PGA All Abilities coaches and getting programs out there, and then heavily marketing those programs so that people can find those entry points into the game. So that's sort of from a grassroots perspective. From the events perspective, continue to sort of grow the offering out there for people with disability in the sort of tournament pathway. We've got the Queensland and Victorian Inclusive Championships. We'll have South Australia, and these were postponed due to the COVID situation that we've got. But New South Wales, South Australia will come online early next year, and we've got a really nice tournament run by Golf New South Wales within the WA Open, which started last year, which will be a regular feature of the WA Open. So from a, I think you've got to attack it from both ways. You've got to sort of think about grassroots participation, having that entry point into the game, but you've also got to build from the top down as well. So the Australian All Abilities Championship, and then those tournaments going down, and then working with our delivery partners, those different disability organisations that help also grow the amount of opportunities there are, for players as well. I think they're probably the sort of the key things that we're focusing on.
Sounds really cool. So I might just apologise. It's just started to pour rain here. So if you can hear that in the background, it always seems to pour whenever I'm doing a podcast. So hopefully I can get that audio cleaned up when we do that.
I'm in stage 4 lockdown here, like you, Brent, and I've got the kids. We've just finished homeschooling and it's school holidays, and I was just waiting for one of those kids to break through the door and start yelling questions at me, but it hasn't happened yet. So touch wood, we'll get through.
I have my 10-year-old chained to the door so he can't say anything. That's the only way to do it. Keep him nice and quiet.
Very good.
Well, Christian, thank you so much for your time today. I certainly appreciate you coming in and chatting to us. There's heaps of cool info you've shared with us on coaching, but there's some standard 4 questions that I like to ask everyone that comes on the podcast. So I'd like to throw those at you before I let you go.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for coaches starting out? So you could probably come at it from this point of view in this all ability space. So if coaches starting up in this space, what advice do you have for them?
I think, if we're going to get specific around the all abilities area, is once again, we talked about a growth mindset from the start, and people with disability want to have really meaningful experiences with our game, and some of the most competitive people I think I've ever met are people with disability. So it's about understanding what your student wants to get out of the sport, and then sort of, I suppose, sitting down I like to do this with most of my sort of pupils that I teach, is just sort of set a bit of a plan, and then work that plan. So but for coaches, really dive into this area. I think it's a space that'll really improve, improve their communication, improve their general coaching. Anyway, it starts to really expand your repertoire as far as what the steps that you take to actually improve a player.
Yeah, it would, and just getting back to that growth mindset, we had Sue Shapcott on the podcast, episode 3 or 4, quite early in the piece, and she was speaking quite heavily about growth mindset. So it's a pretty important thing to have, and it can only improve you as a coach, being able to be flexible to adjust the way you go about it based on that person standing in front of you. It's an important skill to have. So
100%. I love Sue's work. She's
she's
amazing.
Great. So would encourage you to go back and check out her episode as well if you are on the podcast, because she was great. So advice for golfers out there. So again, you can come at it from golfers in general or come at it from golfers with a disability, your choice.
Yeah. It's probably a more generic comment on that, is that I suppose I think over the year we've been a little bit guilty of programming this sort of classroom before the playground sort of mentality, and I think there's probably been, we've probably kept people on the range a little bit too much, and we've sort of put an emphasis on skill, first before actually getting out there and learning the game. And I know my own sort of experience in coming to the game with my dad, Peter. Used to just drag me around for 9 holes and have fun. Just getting out there and playing. I'd probably offer that piece of advice for participants, is just to get out and actually have a go. Get out there on the golf course, experience the joys of what we actually experience as golfers, and don't be afraid to go in full tilt. It's a great sport.
And I would certainly enforce that as well. This is, and again, I grew up in the country, so I grew up on the golf course. It was about, you didn't go to the practice fairway because we didn't have a practice fairway. We had a driving range. We had to pay for the golf balls, and being a 12-year-old kid, I couldn't afford to pay for the golf balls. So you grew up on the golf course. You got on the golf course and you played. That's all it was, and there was 36 holes a day for the school holidays, and get dropped off there in the morning and pick up
at night
as it got dark, and that was about it. So I would certainly encourage that as well, certainly getting onto the golf course sooner rather than later, and as coaches as well.
That's the most special part of our sport, is being out on the golf course and sharing a game and playing with friends and family. And I just see too many people put too much emphasis on having a certain skill level before they actually go out and play golf. But I think I'd like to see a lot more people enjoying the stuff that we enjoy.
Makes sense. Now the third question I ask everyone is the career question. Is there anything that you would change in your career if you had the chance to go back and take a different path or change a choice that you made in the past? Is there anything that you would alter?
No, I think I'm really fortunate in doing what I do now, and I think the skill set that I bring to my role is probably a product of all my own experiences as a PGA professional and as an amateur growing up, and as a club member sort of growing up. So I don't necessarily, there's definitely no regrets from that perspective, because it actually does give you, I think, the tools to be able to do your job, because you've had all those experiences, whether they're good or bad. But probably from a coaching perspective, I would have spent a lot more time on trying to get my, especially beginner students, out onto the golf course as quick as possible, so they actually understand how the game's played. I think I've probably been guilty of, the stock standard beginner programs where it might be 5 weeks and just completely focused on skill. Do they have the tools to be able to then go out and play golf? Maybe not, because we haven't shown them how to play the game. So that's probably, from a coaching perspective, I would have put more emphasis on getting people out on the golf course quicker.
I would certainly put up my own hand and say that I've been guilty of coaching golf swing as opposed to coaching golf early
100%.
on.
Yep.
So that's
100%.
It's a powerful thing to be able to go back and say, okay, well, I could have changed this and this. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so where do you see yourself or golf? You can answer either or both in 5 years' time.
Yeah. Look, I hope to see two things. I hope to see it's interesting. I mean, we're structured a little bit differently than a lot of other sports, but we're effectively hundreds and hundreds of businesses around the country that are working independently. But I think there's an enormous opportunity for us to all work collectively to show people a single entry point into the game. And I think, in my current role, seeing the value that My Golf and Get Into Golf provides to the community as that vehicle for bringing people in through PGA members and community instructors. So I'd love to see a lot more clubs and facilities get behind our national programs. I think that's key, and it's not so much about whether they think that they might run successful programs themselves. That's fine, but having one centralised place where people can find what they're looking for, I think, is really important for us as a sport. So I'll continue to work hard at trying to get everyone on that same journey. I think that's really important, that both organisations, being PGA and Golf Australia, work collectively together to try and make that happen. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing, I mean, I've, in the all ability space especially, just seeing that tournament space grow and grow. And then, I think it'd be really cool if we do, the highlight for me would be to get into the Paralympic Games in 2028. I think that if we do that, we'll see significant investment as well into the sport from a government perspective. So I'd probably say those two things are priorities.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Again, Christian, thank you so much for your time today. I certainly appreciate it. I'll put a link to the All Abilities Coach accreditation in the episode description so people can find that if they are an Australian PGA pro, then they're keen to get involved in that space. But where can people find you if they're after any more information or just want to talk coaching with you?
Yeah, sure. Probably, look, best to reach out via email. Probably best, I think, first port of call. And it's just christianh@golf.org.au. Pretty simple email address. We also got a contact us button on the GA website as well. So if someone has missed that email address, just golf.org.au, the website and the contact us page, and I'll certainly be able to make contact through either of those two channels.
I will put some links in the show, and also we'll put some I think you've got a Twitter handle on there as well, so we'll put a few of your personal coaching ones out there as well, so people can see what you do.
No worries. Terrific.
Awesome, mate. Thank you so much again for your time. Certainly appreciate it, and we'll certainly catch up with you again soon.
Mate, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us on.